Welcome to 1 of 200. It's campaign season. We're taking aim at all the policies and candidates for the 2026 election campaign. And we've got our first candidate here this evening. It is the 29th of June. Welcome, Max Harris, friend of the podcast. How you doing?
Good, Carl. Doing well. Looking forward to you taking aim at me in the next few minutes.
I've been taking aim for years.
Yeah.
I'm also doing my co-host Philip. That was his laugh that you heard in the background. How you doing, Philip?
Kia ora. I'm doing okay. I will also be taking aim, but possibly less accurately. Maybe we'll, instead of a good cop, bad cop, it'll be more of a sniper rifle and a shotgun.
Well, we're
Oh,
really
wait.
starting it off with some interesting metaphor in the age of political violence. But we're really here to talk about the electorate which you're running in, Max, which is the Tāmaki electorate. And an electorate with a really interesting history, which we'll get into a little bit. I think the thing probably to start off with, though, for our audience who maybe haven't been listening to this podcast as long, so haven't heard you on here before, or haven't been following the news in this electorate in particular, where are you from? What are you doing? And how and why were you selected as a Labour candidate?
Yeah, great question. So I mostly grew up in Wellington, actually, and then moved up to Auckland for uni. When I moved up to Auckland, I started a long-standing connection I've got to Tāmaki. I was involved with the Tāmaki tutoring project at university, tutor students from Glendowie, Sacred Heart, Tāmaki College, and have done a few different things, I guess, law, campaigns, and writing. Have really enjoyed being on 1 of 200 in the past, but if we fast forward to the start of this year, I suppose I've done work campaigning from the outside on progressive politics, in particular with Action Station, dental and welfare campaigns, other campaigns on the Treaty Principles Bill, on opposing privatisation, and then I've also done kind of legal work and trying to challenge this government in particular. And I suppose I felt that what this government has done is so profoundly damaging that I suppose we all need a step change in how we tackle and try to end the deep damage and rot. And for me, after thinking about it, after being asked to stand in Tāmaki, I put myself forward, went through a democratic selection process, which is quite local, which involved, a lot of engagement with the local Labour Party, which I'd had a fair bit to do with already, but that was great, to be honest. I called all the members in the local Labour Party. I even door-knocked some local members who were sort of like surprised to see me at their door. So a very organising, focused approach to selection. And then, late March, I was selected. And since then, I'm running hard in this campaign. We opened an office in April, which I can speak more about. I maybe just to add a couple of things about Tāmaki and why that race. As I said, I had some connections to the electorate through university. I've done quite a bit of legal work in the electorate. I've worked with people in the area on community campaigns. I know and feel the sense of pride in that electorate, in particular in Glen Innes, and really wanted to centre the campaign in Glen Innes and in the working class heartlands of that electorate. And also it's an electorate that I found out on the day that I announced my selection was going to have 3 newcomers to the race, because the day that my announcement was planned was also the day that Brooke Van Velden announced that she was resigning. But we can go into that more. Sorry, that's a long introduction.
Really living up to the moniker bestowed upon you by Matthew Hooton to take out a candidate just by being selected for that. Race.
It did bring up the Hitman moniker again, which I still, to be honest, I'm not really sure where that comes from. And
it's absurd.
I'm still not sure how people could look at me and say that, but I'm happy
It makes
it's around.
It's adorable how little sense that makes, eh? Like that's the sharpest right-wing minds of our generation, and that's the best they can come up with.
I think it alliterated, and that was about the range of it.
That's right.
Noted post-editor, but that's a conversation for another time. Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Max, for that kind of quick grounding in place. And I love that you're kind of emphasizing the electorate in your conversations. Like I think that's something that it feels a little bit old-fashioned, but like a lot of political candidates these days kind of treat that as a last point instead of a first point. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, like the importance of local politics reaching down as well as up, if you want to kind of think of it that way, right? Because, we've had local body people and council people talking about how frustrating it is to try to reach out to people who should buy rights, and kind of part of your bloody job description is, sorting out problems for these people when they can't, they're barred from solving them themselves. So, Lord knows we need more people with that kind of set of priorities. But obviously, you're running a two-tick campaign, right? Like you are asking people to vote for the Labour Party. So you're here in that capacity as well. So how has it been running in what is on paper like a very right-wing electorate? Like there are those real like working class heartlands with, a century plus of like pretty hard graft people behind them. And we probably all remember the kind of state housing project and fight there, which feel free to bring that into your answer if you want.
Yeah.
But also there are like huge swaths of that electorate that must be like deeply unfriendly territory. So I would imagine from like suburb to suburb, it's like a world apart. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a very varied electorate. Just to touch on a couple of things you raised in your question as well. I suppose I didn't talk so much about kind of why standing for Labour, and just really in brief, like for me, Labour's roots and Labour's reach into different communities and its local structure, and also its power and ability to transform political economy. Maybe want to stand for Labour. But yeah, to come to your question, it's very varied. So Glen Innes and Point England, working class, in many ways Labour strongholds. As you alluded to, site of major struggle over state housing and regeneration. And a number of years ago, I was living overseas, but when I came back, I visited the house of a woman, Nikki, who some listeners will remember was kind of a key part of that struggle. And it was a chance for views to be voiced about like the importance of state housing, the importance of putting down roots in a place, and how state housing can keep communities connected. Lucky to be kind of connected to people who were involved with that and are still connected to Glen Innes. For example, Vanessa Cole, who spoke at an event we had in our office a couple of weeks ago. But to come to the rest of your question on kind of how varied it is, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is like reclaim this electorate and reclaim its history, and to tell a different story of it, because I think a story's been told of it in recent years as Mission Bay, St Heliers, and a particular slice of people in that area. But, this is also the electorate of Takaparafo, Bastion Point, the Kohimarama Conference on Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It's the place of state housing struggles in Glen Innes, but also state housing in Orake. It's a place where there's Ngāti Whātua housing in Orake. It's a place where Michael Joseph Savage's memorial is right there. So I think reclaiming it as a progressive electorate and making visible working class people and their struggles historically and now is a really important part of what we're trying to do. Yes, there are parts of it that are that traditionally have been very blue, but what I'd emphasize is even in the northern parts of the electorate, and for people that are not familiar, it covers, and I'll try and get everything in here, so Orake, Mission Bay, Kohimarama, St Heliers, Glendowie, Nealong, Meadowbank, Stonefields, Glen Innes, Point England, and I probably haven't covered quite everything there, Waiotaki Bay as well. But even within some of those suburbs, there's quite a lot of breadth of experience. So Orake, for example, I think is openly acknowledged as a place of really significant wealth, but there's also state housing there. There's also Ngāti Whātua, Orake, and I met with the principal of Orake School, and he was talking about that kind of diversity within the electorate. I won't go on for too long, but maybe the last thing I'll say about some parts of that electorate is a lot of people I've spoken to who might see themselves as conservatives have talked about their disappointment in the ACT Party, that maybe they didn't get what they'd wished for. A lot of people talk about the vote for Brooke Van Velden being an anti-Simon O'Connor vote, who of course had made a lot of abhorrent comments about abortion. And then they got awful pay equity decisions. They got destructive health and safety law. They got trashing of Te Tiriti that the ACT Party has really driven. And people are, rethinking their options. Some people not happy with their existing National and ACT options. And I think my challenge is to say they should look at me and they should look at the Labour Party as a real choice.
Of course, the last time I think this electorate was held by a non-right-wing party was Bob Tizard, like that, all like 1950s. And then it was held by Muldoon for years as well. But even in that sense, there are some very different strands of what the National Party were compared to what they've become today. We've talked about it before on this podcast as well, on the way that Brooke Van Velden was able to find an electoral success in this electorate. Do you also see that split between what you call more liberal values and conservative values, as well as those class differentials? And do you see potential there from a Labour point of view, even with, a trio of new candidates who will all be kind of hustling to present themselves as the answer for Tāmaki?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'll come back to the sort of like face-to-face politics point that you mentioned, Phil, because I want to kind of address that too. But yeah, I think there's a whole range of politics in the area. And I think like the reality is that most people who don't spend, most of their lives thinking about politics, which maybe is us three, have a range of political positions and that can be quite ideologically varied. But there is definitely there has been an attempt by the ACT Party to strengthen its kind of strange mix of like libertarian and right-wing populism in the electorate. But then there is, as you're nodding to, Kyle, like an older kind of conservatism in the electorate. And one thing I really have known, like for the period that I've worked and been connected to the electorate, is that there is a real strong sense of community in the electorate. And I can come back to this, but I think there is a real genuine worry about loneliness and social isolation. And I think that can be felt by people who are conservative and believe in community, or people who are kind of more traditionally like progressive and believe in solidarity. So for example, there's a new initiative set up in the eastern suburbs called Familiar Faces, which is all about tackling loneliness. There's a men's shed, which was set up particularly because there was concern about kind of isolation among men. There's a tool library down in Glen Innes, which was all about like keeping a space for community connection. And that's, just one example of, I think, that an interesting focus on community that I think is particularly strong in the electorate. I think maybe this is true of lots of places, but I think a lot of people in the electorate also see themselves as open-minded and reasonable and considered, and with a strong focus on local advocacy from their local MP. And they really do say, we're happy to accept like a whole range of people, and we just want someone who can kind of fight for us. And as you said as well, Carl, they've sort of had a range of National Party figures, and have had people talk about Clem Simic. I think I'm right in saying Clem Simic was there for a period, and a sort of quieter and different kind of National MP. Alongside Muldoon and Simon O'Connor. There's this real focus on kind of visibility and advocacy. And just to loop back to what you said, Philip, because I meant to come onto this. For me, I think it's key to get back to face-to-face politics. And I know this can sound like a bit of a platitude or a bit of a cliche, but I really enjoy being on the doors and giving a chance for people for me to earn people's trust on the doors, and then doing kind of face-to-face events, which again are a chance for in-person people to kind of size you up, and also a chance to like build real relationships as a solid foundation for politics. And I think actually the idea for an office came out of the Fessel Collins campaign, and came from the fact that we did a huge amount of work in that campaign, just kind of scrambling and scrapping with limited resources. And it was only towards the end of the campaign that I'm pretty sure it was a Fessel or a Fessel's family that said, actually, like, we really need a physical space for this last part of the campaign. And we really felt, a different rhythm that came from that. And I remember thinking, if I'm ever involved in another campaign heavily, like I really want a physical space. And coming out of COVID, I think there's a hunger for more of the face-to-face, and also the small interactions, like after a talk or after an event where someone too shy to ask a question, who really wants to get under the surface of a discussion, can have that further conversation. And that's where, so many new door knockers have been found. That's where like new interesting lines of inquiry have been discovered. So sorry to go on a little bit, but I really believe in that stuff, and it's exciting to get back into it.
No, it's really important. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that's where the goal is, right? Like those will be your most committed people, is the people you have a quiet word with after a talk, not the people who show up and then leave and then go to a Brooke Van Velden talk. And you can have 1,000 people in a room and none of them are dedicated, but you can have 10 people in a room and those 10 door knockers can make much more difference, right? Like it's that kind of campaign mindset that is like makes these things quite exciting. So I guess to hand you like the question every candidate wants to hear, like what are the supportive questions or like comments you're getting on doorsteps if you're physically door knocking or like your door knockers are bringing back feedback? Like what are the big kind of hit points that you reckon is resonating so far?
Yep. So I think a lot of people like the fact that we have an office. I'm not sure if this is true, but we were told that it's the first time that a Labour or Progressive candidate has had an office in the town centre, possibly since Matiurata. Someone came by and said, oh, Matiurata had an office around the corner. I haven't actually been able to check or follow that up. But and people like that we're on the doors. So I actually door knocked a lovely guy called Mark in Point England on the weekend who said he was a Green voter, but said he would vote Labour in the electorate. And he said, he made a point about capital gains tax. He's just like, we've got to do it. But he said, this is the first time I've been like door knocked by a candidate, and was really happy that we were kind of out on the doors. So yeah, being out on the doors, having an office. I think people like the focus on working people and the cost of living. I also walked past this group of 5 guys on Saturday afternoon who were, I think, like having a drink, like chilling outside a house. I like almost didn't want to interrupt them in Point England, but I was like, I need to check if they're enrolled, and they were really interested. And I just asked them that, and I was like, "You guys all enrolled?" And they were like, "Yeah." And they kind of wanted to have a chat, and I kept kind of pulling away because that's almost my instinct. But they were interested, and they were talking about working people, and they were like, "Oh, like tell us more about like the work you've done and what you mean by that." And I talked about some of the like in the last week I'd helped someone out with a mediation and got a positive result, and some of the other legal work that I've done and some of the other community work. And, I think that resonated with people. We've had some really good conversations about the fuel crisis. And I think just starting with kind of asking people how the fuel crisis has affected people is just as a good prompt. And like, on the doors, like when you ask, oh, what are the issues affecting you? Like no one has an answer because people are being interrupted. But yeah, people appreciated that prompt, and there's been some amazing and pretty sad stories. For example, someone on our team who brought back that a support worker had to go from Glen Innes to South Auckland every day for work and was getting no top-ups from employer or government. And so her costs were just increasing and increasing, with relatively low wages, and was really feeling the pinch. And, the person was able to report that back and the kind of like feeling behind it. And I think that's been really positive, that we're kind of really trying to, I guess, hear that and figure out what a kind of active government response should be. In terms of other positives, I mean, I've been out and about in other parts of the electorate, and again, I think people are surprised to see like a Labour candidate there. So I was out in Glendowie the weekend before, off Riddell Road, and I talked to a nurse and a teacher, and I feel like felt like they'd only ever had kind of national options. The teacher was really exhausted. Yeah. And I think just having an option, and I've heard people say that, like, and this is no disrespect to past candidates who I think have run really good campaigns, but there's a feeling maybe that this is quite a visible campaign, with a physical presence. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to prod me on that, take aim at me on that. I could say more.
I think one of the really, I don't know if interesting is even the right word, but it's such a good default. Narratives or pieces of discourse and ways of working through campaigns that's developed of the last my entire life, following electoral politics, is this idea that some was a stronghold, somewhere is like, unwinnable. Some MPs or candidates have to get their stripes by running in this really hard place. And then there's a sense among the public that it's just being phoned in. And, sometimes that is the case. Sometimes that's 100% the case, especially with if that person ends up with a higher list ranking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see they'll be put at like number 50 or something, and like, okay, they really have to go for it. You've ended up with like a pretty good list ranking for a new candidate, but how has that consideration around the way people are likely to approach you? You've said
Mm.
people are kind of surprised to see you there, or
Yeah.
like glad that they might have an option to vote for.
Yeah.
But in the wider scheme of things, in terms of the party and in terms of politics in this country and in Auckland in
Yeah.
general, where you've got a
Yeah.
bunch of these kind of electorates,
Mm.
how are you and your campaign approaching that?
Yeah. Tell me if I'm not answering your question directly, but I'll do my best. So, first of all, yeah, I'm definitely not phoning this in, and I actively wanted to stand for Tāmaki, and I won't deny that part of that was Brooke Van Velden being there initially, and I was really keen to debate her and to take her on. And to me, it's a really exciting challenge for us as progressives that the ACT Party is at 6%, and I think that driving home the absolute attempt to rot this country's foundations, and in some cases, the success in undermining some of these countries' foundations needs to be fought. And I was totally up for that, and I had these connections, and I felt a lot of love for the electorate and also the variety of it. Like I thought this is a great challenge, like appealing and leaning into some of the other aspects of my background as a lawyer and all of that in other parts of the electorate. Like I was completely like up for this challenge, and I still am. And then Brooke Van Velden stood down. We've got James Christmas, Hesh Muridau, which we can come back to. But yeah, I think this electorate is incredibly interesting, including for the historical reasons I mentioned. But yeah, to come back to the other part of your question, so the list and I guess how that affects dynamics and kind of how we see electorates like this. I mean, I'll be honest with you, like I was like pleasantly surprised and happy with that list ranking. I feel like, it is also a response to the really good work that our whole campaign team and our whole campaign has done in Tāmaki, because I was getting some really lovely feedback from the broader Labour Party, people like seeing our social media, and we've got two amazing young people like running that social media. We've got an amazing field team with I think some of the best organisers in Tāmaki Makaurau. We've got like a really team really rooted in the area. So I think it was a nice vote of confidence in the kind of campaign we're running, but it's also a way that we can reinforce to people on the doors and in the community that we're serious about this campaign and this is a serious candidacy. But yeah, I mean, I really think, especially in progressive politics, we should be refocusing on working class communities where there's like a concentration of working class people and working class power. And so for me, going into Glennis, being there, and Point England, Waiotaki Bay, and St John's to some extent, it's a great organising challenge. And one other thing we're trying to do is kind of model how I might be as an electorate MP. So I was, in the office in GI today, and like dealing with people, trying to support people who, had issues with visas. And last week I had someone who wanted to move Kāinga Order House, someone who was evicted, who wanted support. And I think being able to be of service and in solidarity, and then hopefully through that, like building power as well by connecting people, offering support and resources to people, offering our offices and support. Hopefully that's a form of politics that we can keep building on. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very that's quite a radical kind of presentation of how to act in a otherwise quite what can become quite a kind of anodyne environment, right? Like running for an electorate can become very, count the number of doors, count the number of letters, get a bloody like letter writing campaign together can feel very like, I don't know, bashing your head against
by numbers.
the wall. Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about is with your background in Action Station and other like progressive organizing like groups, including like public ownership and relatively radical like mayoral campaign strategy and UK Labour when that was a good thing rather than a bad thing. How have you found the transition, I guess, into a more like inverted commas mainstream organization or like the role that you're playing there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, just to touch on those other places and experiences, like, yeah, when I think about my time with UK Labour, I think of like a real like thriving policy environment where a strong Labour campaign meant we felt like we were on the front foot, like across the country, and the tables have turned. It felt, not to that like Tracy Chapman song I listened to yesterday, and like that feeling of like, um, you know, being on the front foot with, strong, bold policy was something I really learned from and was politicized by. When I think of the Efeso campaign, obviously I think of the person and want to remember Efeso and a person of heart and integrity, but also was willing to go to be ambitious. Fair's free public transport is kind of key plank, and wanted to door knock and wanted to be on the doors, even though that was something that like previous mayoral campaigns hadn't done. And it was an attempt to bring together different kinds of politics as well, and to bring together Pacific and Māori communities and working class communities and unions. Maybe I can come back to unions and their role in my campaign as well. And then when I think, I guess, of action station work, like I think about like great people, people with great politics and, creative tactics, like, doing a gig for Dental for All at East Street, or doing a roadshow around the country to try to build like local power and local organising groups, people's press conferences on disability and welfare issues, and building people power, I suppose. So that's, just a long backdrop. And in terms of how I find the transition, I mean, hopefully like I bring my like whole self into the current role. And I have had bits to do with the Labour Party in the past. I have been involved with the Labour Party in the past, including in the UK and earlier. So this doesn't feel like a kind of turn for me. And for me, Labour Party, at its best, has always been had a commitment to mass politics, a democratic socialist party, a party that is committed to working class communities and Māori and Pacifica communities. And for me, it's about, kind of bringing those like people and experiences along, and also bringing like lessons. And, on the Efeso campaign, like I was new to my role there, and I like made mistakes, and so hopefully it's like learning some of your own or lessons and taking things forward. In some ways this is different from action station campaigning. I mean, I think other people would say in action station and other campaigning, sometimes it's so frustrating to when you're not sure about your influence on politicians, and when you're really trying hard to kind of to shift them, and that's the ultimate goal, as well as to build people power. And obviously that's a change to present myself as a politician, to be working alongside other politicians. I mean, one point just around that is I really do believe deeply in the power of like social movements and campaigns and driving agendas, and I will never give up on that. And actually, one thing I saw with John McDonnell in the UK was the kind of dance between parliamentary politics or electoral politics and left politics and social movement politics on the outside, and how there was always an attempt through kind of who John met with and who he worked with to build power. And that's hopefully something I can continue to do. And so, for me, I'll really try to maintain connections to social movements, and met up with Forest and Bird on Friday. Been in contact with Action Station colleagues, and maybe to come back to unions, who I don't see just as part of social movements, but in a category of their own. Like, it was very important to me to be backed by unions, and so when I was a candidate, I was endorsed by E10. And met up with MUNS, the Maritime Union, and RMTU, and had great conversations about really ensuring that working people in unions would be a key part of this campaign. We had an awesome volunteer training session at the Maritime Union, which has its base in Ōrākei, or has a base in Ōrākei in the electorate, and really keen to continue to have working people's voices kind of centered in the social media that we do, and union priorities running through this campaign. I hope that gets at some of your question. That's kind of what I'll try to bring in, and that's a little bit of how the transition has felt.
Yeah, perfect. I want to get into what you are seeing on the ground. You said earlier, it can kind of be difficult for people who you do not to just have something ready for you to go, right? Like, oh yeah, there's this one problem in Tāmaki which I need solved. But you've been at it for a little while now. What I think candidates can miss is like what are the local issues rather than trying to sell the party level policies.
Yeah.
And especially when you're in a two-tick campaign, like finding that balance. But
Yeah.
what are you hearing from the wider community, not necessarily like from an individual on the doorstep, about what the specific issues in Tāmaki are
Yeah.
that either are similar or different for the wider electorate in Auckland, but the rest of the country as well?
Yeah.
Because as we've said, it's quite a complex part of the region.
Yeah.
There's a whole range of different experiences. You've given us a couple of indications of the way that some people who live in Tāmaki are kind of facing the challenges of the fuel crisis and the like with regional travel across Auckland. Is there anything else that you're seeing or hearing that is kind of locked within the boundaries of the electorate that you want to talk about or you want to kind of give a platform?
Yeah, totally. First of all, I think people will say different things depending on where you are in the electorate. And I really believe like who you choose to listen to, who you prioritize and who you listen to is a political choice. And, there's a reason we're starting with Glen Innes and Point England, and we're, fanning out from there. And we are keen to stretch out across the electorate. One exciting thing is we've just set up kind of hub leaders across the electorate who are going to run their own door knocks. But we started listening to Glen Innes and Point England, so we'll focus a little bit on that. There's been quite a lot of talk about a quite hyper-local issue about the size of the streets in Taniwha and GI and buses and not being able to park on streets. But because that probably won't be familiar to a lot of listeners, maybe I'll focus on another local issue, but one that I think people could grasp quickly, which is a lot of people have talked about how the Work and Income Office in Glen Innes burned down and no replacement work and income site was set up. And so people in Glen Innes have to travel to Ellerslie for work and income issues. And that, for people who know, is 2 bus rides away. It's an expensive car ride away. It's not just around the corner. And, this is at a time when we know unemployment has been rising, when we know if you go to the CAB, as I've done, or you go to any local budgeting service, requests for hardship assistance have exploded. So this is adding a cost, and at the time of the fuel crisis, when fuel is more expensive. So this is making life even harder for people who are struggling. And people are wondering also why nothing's been done about it. So I'm not trying to be the sort of like effective local rep reporting back, but I did email MSD. And what was interesting was, I have worked with people from MSD on Fair Future campaigns in the past. They took a while to get back to me. They did kind of keep me posted about that. But they eventually came back to me and they said, this is temporary. And I wanted to set up a meeting with MSD because it's something I hear every door knock. We had an event called Making Our Social Services Work, where, by the way, we also heard a lot about disability cuts and the impact on the disability community. That's something we hear a lot about. But at that meeting, it was raised again. And anyway, the MSD also said, unfortunately, you have to go through the minister. And so the only way you can advocate for this is to go to Louise Upston. And yeah, I was struck by that because obviously we're in an election campaign. I will make efforts to go to the minister. But I think when there's this strength of community feeling, there should be other opportunities for advocacy. So I'll keep speaking about that issue because it's causing a lot of people strife. Where we locate our government departments, and in particular where we locate services that are providing for people in need, and when we know there's unmet need, is really critical. So that's one thing that I've really heard. Another issue, probably more broadly in the electorate, but that I want to mention is water quality. So, the electorate also contains like some of the most beautiful kind of swimming spots and some of the most beautiful beaches in Auckland, like Mission Bay, like St Heliers, Marama. And when there's a storm, quite frequently people are told the beaches are too dirty to swim in. And even in parts of the electorate that might be traditionally bluer, people are really concerned by this. People are worried that they can't swim, and they also know that a lot of people come to these places from the rest of the city, and this is where a lot of business makes its money. And tying those issues together, I suppose, like the cost of living and water quality in that part of town, what I would say is there's a lot of anxiety at the moment in the electorate. And that's actually the word that was used by a principal, who I won't name, but a principal who I met today, not at the school I mentioned earlier. But yeah, there's a real sense of anxiety in the electorate if you're a worker, because, and I've heard this, people's protections have been, taken from under them. Or they've lost pay equity, which they were promised. 33 pay equity claims cancelled overnight, where historically undervalued sectors dominated by women were about to have their undervaluation corrected, and that was again taken from under them. Or if they're businesses, and I'm hearing this, people are spending less, and we know that in the central city as well, where venues are affected. Places like Neck of the Woods almost closing, Flying Out closing. Because of the cost of living crisis, people have less money to go out, and that flows through into the entire economy. And I was told today that means there's anxiety among parents, and these are the words of the principal, like the kids learn from their parents and the kids are more anxious. So yeah, I guess I've mentioned something material there. I guess I mentioned something environmental, but there's also a kind of mood of anxiety that I think I'm hearing in the electorate. Sorry, long answer. I wasn't planning it to be that one.
It's got to be you're already claiming your new your reigns of power as the rambling Tāmaki MP, which I think you have to be, right?
Short answers from now. Short answers from now.
Please, no.
No, you got to get snappier. It's got to be a quick voice clip.
I was gonna do the kind of the shadow question, or the mirror, the inverse of the talking about the supporters on the doorstep, or like how the workers that you're speaking to, feeding into those questions. I mean, to synthesize both your kind of your background and I mean you've mentioned like campaigns for dental health for everyone, free public transport, like Labor's not standing on those platforms, right? So presumably you door knock some people who have complaints from the left for Labor. And how do you field that as someone with the background that you've got?
First point, not trying to sound defensive, but one thing that I am really stoked to see in what Labor's put out so far is, while it might not be the specific policies you mentioned, like there is a commitment to universalism in these policies. So yeah, for example, like free maternity scans, free GP visits, public transport fare cap. I think one thing that's incredibly positive about those is they're universal. They're not about increasing targeting or extending means testing. And I think that's really critical. And just to say something briefly about that, I think when we have universal policies, the middle class benefits, and the middle class is more likely to defend these policies, and we all can kind of like level up the things that we feel like we have as citizens, as people. But my honest answer to you, Philip, I'm not lying, is I honestly have not heard on the doors complaints from the left. I have heard complaints like outside the doors, so people like more politically engaged people. But I swear to you, I'm not lying. I think it's possibly that like people don't necessarily like expect to be door knocked, and maybe in longer conversations, just to acknowledge the point, like things would come out. But honestly, a lot of people are really busy and like really stretched and not even aware of like the policies that have been announced, and happy to hear about like a capital gains tax. Mostly will talk about like those local issues. Like that is my honest answer. In terms of like, talking to other people, because like I accept that like other people have said that kind of thing. I guess like one response is like, I think it's important, and I've heard people be positive along these lines in Tāmaki as well. So bring this back to Tāmaki, but important to see the policies that have been announced as kind of like a steer and a commitment to a set of values. So like I've mentioned universalism. I also think whatever you might say about like a capital gains tax, that that is a stand in favor of a different kind of economy. And like we can keep talking for like years about like having a property dependent economy, having like economy based in real estate and nothing else, and not do anything about it. But at least it's a step in shifting investment away. The Future Fund, again, say what you like about it, and it's a range of commentary, but like I think that it is a signal towards like a more hands-on approach to kind of economic development, and a more active approach to economic development, as opposed to this kind of resistance, for years to kind of industrial policy, and in particular under the kind of current government. So that's generally what I say.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to your interview on Ollie Ners's podcast, I forget, Public Interest, which I thought was really good. And you mentioned those things, and also said that you felt that the Labour Party had kind of was reckoning with its history of embracing neoliberalism, and trying to take steps to, whether you want to say move past or rebuke its history of that embrace. Um, how do you feel like that's going? Like, is for those of us outside the machinations, do you feel like there's kind of an ongoing conflict about that, or is it something that's looked upon as like a shameful past, or is like how does that fit in the day-to-day kind of machinery of the Labour Party these days?
Yeah, I'll try and bring it back a little bit to Tāmaki and keeping things local, but it's a fair and good question. I think in 2024, it was the 40th anniversary, right, of Rogernomics, and I think Chris Hipkins made some pretty strong statements about Rogernomics and its impacts. I think on the weekend that's just been, I think Chris Hipkins said, trickle down neoliberal economics as a hoax, or words to that effect. So I think there's a strong stand, against that kind of economics that was centered in the 80s. I think, like, to be honest, it's a challenge because, like, Longy, and for society as a whole, like, Longy is such a revered figure, and I feel like for society as a whole, figuring out how to think about Longy is harder than, say, Roger Douglas, who went away and started the Axe Party. What I'll say, just to tie it back to Tāmaki, is I feel like there's a sense on the doors of kind of decades long system that needs to be challenged, or that we need like kind of a fresh start and different directions. And I've definitely heard things along those lines. I've heard from workers about kind of really wanting new directions and attempts to kind of reclaim worker power. And I take that to be about continuing to unwind, the Employment Contracts Act. I take that to be what I'm hearing on the doors. And what I'm hearing from people. So I think it's a process, and I think that the great thing about the Labour Party is its democracy, and that it does value members. And if people are interested, I think being a member of any political party is powerful, and I think worthwhile to be like a member of the Labour Party and to be part of those discussions, at local LECs and at the national level. And one thing just to add, because I've kind of alluded to it earlier, is that I think the great thing about the Labour Party base, and you see this in like LEC meetings, is it does still reflect working class communities, and it does still represent like a broad range of community. And so you hear these discussions in those spaces, and would encourage people to join up if they're interested in all of that.
And to fully close that circle, I heard Roger Douglas is one of the people who spoke to James Christmas about running for the Axe Party. So last hardball question: how are you going to beat James Christmas and Mahesh? Like, do you have to be a young, overachieving man to run in the Tāmaki electorate? And also, how are you going to win? Like, that's two very specific kind of personalities and CVs that you're up against, right?
I mean, in some ways, there are some similarities, and in other ways, there are some very significant differences. One answer, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but one answer is like, I think Tāmaki people are looking for really effective local advocacy, and that requires good listening, understanding issues, having relationships, and being a really powerful advocate. And I think that I have those skills, so I think I can speak to that. I do think there are people who are concerned about the Axe Party, and I've heard this, people that think the Axe Party went too far. This is what I'm hearing in the electorate. Older people, I went to a retirement village recently, East Cliff, and we had a conversation about this. Older people who think the Axe Party's gone too far on the Treaty Principles Bill, people who have kids and grandkids who speak to their Māori or are Māori or in Māori communities, think that's part of our future, and think the Axe Party has kind of turned away from that future. So I think there's a real concern about ACT, and James Christmas has to stand up and defend that. And then, James Christmas has left the National Party. And, there are people who have asked me questions about that. Why has he left the National Party? What are the reasons for that? And then, Mahesh Murudar has to do his own job of persuading people, having run in Auckland Central, that, he's going to be a community-centred advocate for Tāmaki. I have heard from National Party voices that there are some people in the electorate who are unhappy with both National and ACT and are thinking about not voting at all. And so my challenge is to justify or persuade those people that I'm worth their vote. And one other point is that I think there are people who might usually be blue who can see and have said as much that National, even in the government, even on its own benchmarks, has failed. Like, they talked about a big game on productivity, which has remained stagnant. They talked a big game on growth, which has, tumbled backwards. They talked a big game on fixing the cost of living, which they haven't done. So the other thing that I won't get too spiky now, and we have a nice relationship, like a respectful relationship, with Mahesh and James. I'd actually met James through legal work earlier, and I won't get too spiky, but the one point I will make is that in the only time I think that we've appeared, the three of us, in a debate, both Mahesh and James uttered the line, Wellington doesn't understand Auckland. And they got some applause. But what I said in reply was, you're both part of the government that's currently in Wellington now that you say doesn't get Auckland. So they have to front up for this government that people are disappointed about, that has failed them. And the debates are going to be a chance for them to front up.
Yeah, I guess two final things I wanted to quickly touch on. I guess potentially to try and wrap it back to the wider campaign and the upcoming election at the end of the year. The first is kind of calling to something that you were saying around the people on the doorstep not necessarily being aware of the policies, alongside this sentiment that you're seeing somewhat across the spectrum that does not seem to mirror what we're seeing in a lot of mainstream analysis and media coverage of like public sentiment. How do you get cut through on that for an electorate campaign and to, I guess, broaden that into the wider election? But also, how do you activate people to vote? Because I think one worry that a lot of people in the progressive space have is the turnout's just not going to be good enough. And those two things obviously work hand in hand. People aren't getting enough information. Their voices aren't being mirrored to a wider audience via the fourth estate, and that then suppresses the vote.
Yeah, great questions. I mean, I have had some select mainstream media journalists want to talk to me like on background who've come across the campaign and want to talk, for example, about like the fuel crisis in Gleninnes. And I'll keep pitching to them to come to that place and that community. And I understand that persuasion and pitches might not be enough there. We'll keep trying to use our own channels and social media to center what people are saying. And, if any journalists are listening to this, and
they
mainstream media,
Max, they are listening to this.
then, I would really encourage you to come down and come spend time in the office and see who's coming through and see the kind of stories that they're relaying, because I think it's really insightful. There is a lot of struggle out there. There is a lot of anxiety, and a lot of isolation. On enrolment, we've been doing a lot on this. And so, we've been going out with enrolment forms and consent forms for follow-up. We've been trying different things. We've had some amazing young people get involved in our campaign. We just put a reel out this week of a young person who's a Selwyn College student who just had taken enrolment forms to school and enrolled 30 people at school, which is pretty mean. And
huge shout out to whoever that was. Incredible work.
Amazing. A person called Ronnie. I can say their name because it's said in the reel as well. And Ronnie just keeps going out, came back and collected some more enrolment forms. People have been coming. We've been building relationships in the office, and people have been coming in and getting enrolment forms for the community. And I've also been contacted by people as I've built up community relationships. People have said, go around, take enrolment forms there. But this is a real challenge with what this government has done. The horrific actions around making enrolment so difficult, and I think they know the impacts that will have. We have to be more creative. And Action Station has tried to bring people together to talk about enrolment and to organise around this. we have to be organized, and that has to be part of our strategy early. And if I can make a plug, don't want to cut across, one of 200's positioning, but if you are interested in door knocking, and you don't have to be a part of the Labour Party, we have lots of people who come who are not. Then every Saturday, and mostly Saturday afternoons, we're door knocking, mostly based in our office, 45 Mayfair Place in Glen Innes, and we'll load you up with some leaflets and some enrolment forms. And it can be like a really fulfilling experience, I'll also say, when you enroll people. And I just want to mention one story there, which is, I went into a house, and usually you don't go into houses, but there was this really warm, or, it's discouraged, you're sort of meant to be a little bit cautious, but there was this really warm guy. He was a Samoan guy, and he couldn't work because of a workplace injury. And his eyes lit up when I mentioned enrollment. And he said, "We just got our passports. I would love for you to come in." I came in, and then he was like, "I'm going to get the whole family." And then I realized that his grandma was sitting like around the corner in front of a TV, and she came out. And then he was like, hold on. I'm going to go get my wife." And he goes and gets his wife. And he gets two other people, and they sit there with their new passports on the table, and we fill out their enrollment forms together, and they want to take a photo because they're so proud. And it was a beautiful moment. And so I just want to communicate to people that, there's a lot wrong with our democracy, and there's a lot more we need to do beyond enrollment. But that feeling of like connecting people, engaging people, it's the start of a relationship, but it's incredibly fulfilling. I really wanted that to be a short answer, and I think I spoke for 6 minutes, so I'm sorry about that.
No, fantastic. Kia ora. That's what a wonderful story. And it's really one of those things when you're talking about community-based stuff and like connecting with people in your communities and building those relationships, there's just such a pushback on some of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that is just being hammered by the coalition at the moment. So I really, really appreciate you bringing that story to us.
And look, the chances in Tāmaki are obviously on paper rough, but your anecdote reminded me of an anecdote many years ago, when I was landscaping in Mission Bay. I was doing some work for a guy down off the road, a retired guy. I think you could safely say a social conservative based on his comments on the colors of his neighbors and their behavior. But he got me a cup of tea one day, and I saw he had a card. This was years ago, pre-COVID, which probably would have changed everything. But he had a card for Simon O'Connor on his wall, and I said, "How's he been?" And just pointed at him, and he said he doesn't care about us, and I'll never vote for them again. And it's that kind of like personal touch that you're talking about that could absolutely, that person will never, I imagine, be a Labour voter, but that person might be a Max voter. It's like it is a real touch of personality and difference that I think like the New Zealand kind of mainstream ethos towards politics is so tribal still after like all these years of MMP and even more years of people splitting their votes. Like it's embarrassing that there's still this mentality, but an electorate MP is a real thing that we should like respect and acknowledge exists. There are people who are bloody good at this stuff, like Nikki K, right? Like there were plenty of Nikki K voters who were not like national stalwarts. And whilst those people can like pull people towards their kind of locus of ability, you don't need to be the kind of box checking enterprise to run. So it's always exciting to hear that you're running a bit differently.
As like someone that's like felt very fulfilled doing legal work, securing services for people, whether that's like disability services or working income or other services, like I think I'm really keen to keep learning about how to be an excellent like local advocate. But yeah, even in the work that I've done so far, I think there's so much that can be done. And yeah, my hope, I suppose, is that with some people we can suggest that Party of the People, Labour, might be their choice this time. For some people, it might be understanding me and like hopefully seeing, without blowing my own trumpet, like some level of genuineness and like follow through that. They might reconsider kind of where they sit, their party. I don't think any electorate should be kind of written off. And there are some interesting parts of the Tāmaki electorate we haven't touched on. There's a high number of renters. in different suburbs in the electorate, including Kohimarama. And we were hearing today from this principal about some big villas with renters living underneath. There's a lot of people who live on their own, who feel social isolation, who want community and like a politics of community. So yeah, we want to achieve a historic result in Tāmaki for Labour and for me as a candidate. And if anyone is excited by that, would love to have you involved with door knocking. Sorry to get that plug in again. And keep listening to 10200. Love your work. Love your work with 10200 and 10200 for a number of years. I think I was first on the show in the UK. And we don't have enough progressive and left media in this country. And the commentary that you all do, with the humor and the realness and the insight, I think is extremely important. So keep listening and supporting, listening to and supporting 10200.
We'll get you back on to say that again when you're an MP. Any final plugs, Max? Do you want to do another door knocking plug or campaign donations plug?
How quickly will this go out? Because I could mention just a couple of upcoming events if people are interested. So yeah, if you are interested in what I've had to say, one event that I'd encourage you to come along to is on Tuesday, the 7th of July at 6 p.m. at the St. Heliers Community Centre. I'm giving a kind of longer talk. It's called A New Voice for Tāmaki, a talk on Tāmaki's priorities. We actually want to provide kind of speeches of substance in this campaign as well. I'm going to try to bring together kind of 3 themes that I've heard from Tāmaki. Those being kind of community and loneliness, anxiety and struggle, and kind of pride and what this government's doing to kind of the things we should be proud of. Would really encourage you to come along to that. If you're in St. Heliers on Monday evening on the 6th of July, there's also the first event with 3 candidates plus questions. And actually on Wednesday, also next week from when we're speaking, it's a very busy week. We've got an event at Annabelle's restaurant with Ginny Anderson, and you can find out details of that on our socials. On the 24th of July, I'm chairing an event with Bernard Hickey and Barbara Edmonds as well in the Electorate. So that's a few events that are coming up, and there'll be future events as well on I guess topics of interest in the electorate. But thanks a lot for having me on, Carl and Philip. It's always nice to talk to you.
And always a pleasure to have you on as well, Max. If you've enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. Go and help Max out if you feel inclined to do so. We're not endorsing one way or another because we're in the Wild West here.
We're objective centrists who couldn't possibly suggest what our real views are, and you'll never guess them in a million years.
It couldn't possibly, not with 10 years of audio recordings telling you exactly what they are. Keep listening to 10200 campaign season. We're going to be trying to cover policies, talk to more candidates, try and get as many of these kind of new candidates on as possible to discuss what's happening on the ground, what are the points of difference that they have with the other campaigns that are out there, and maybe even with their own parties, and what policies they're excited to talk about and bring to the people of Aotearoa. That's been another episode of 10200. We'll catch you next time.